All right. Shalom, shalom, family. Hopefully, this one's running because I'm gonna get right to what I'm gonna talk about real fast. I'm just gonna double check to make sure it's running because first it wasn't running the first time. All right, looks like it's good now. All right. So, real fast, I want to talk about something that I just realized the other day. So, the other day we were talking about the mystery behind the genetics of the people who went over from pretty much Carthage. Did they reach America? I found something really interesting. I found two things that's actually really interesting. One, I was looking at this video and something came to me while I was watching this video. This is just a AU's page. Now, it's interesting because it shows these ancient finds that they were talking about, that they were trying to figure out the Native American language. What's interesting about that is that if you look at the Native American language, right? What's interesting about it is that you'll notice something really interesting if you know about cuneiform, right? Cuneiform is actually a type of language. Let me make sure I pause on this first image. It goes by so fast. I got to make sure I pause it as soon as it come up. Not this one, but right here. You can kind of tell this is actually cuneiform. This is actually cuneiform. And now what's interesting about it is that cuneiform is an Akkadian language. This is actually really interesting because when I started to notice, I noticed that we'll actually see some type of almost like a style of Paleo Hebrew and pictographic Hebrew, and then mixed with a type of style with cuneiform. They have a lot of different styles with cuneiform, which is really interesting when you compare it to cuneiform. This one is a little mixed with the Paleo. And you can notice that just by some of the writing. Like this is clearly cuneiform. The way that it's chipped like that, that's cuneiform without a doubt. Let me just show you something real fast. So this is cuneiform right here. Cuneiform was by the Akkadians, think the Sumerians, think the Scythians, right? Connected to them and all those things. You had a lot of. Now it's also important to know the Assyrians also had that because the Assyrians were mixing in with a lot of the ones up there in the north. It's very interesting to see the whole picture on how that had happened. Now I actually have a piece of evidence that I know that the Akkadian language reached all the way to America, and that's in this other note. I'm actually open that real fast while I'm actually showing this of the little information of the Akkadian right here. You've probably seen cuneiform before. Now, if you know how it's made and stuff, is basically taking something like a rod and basically tapping it down, and basically it gets these type of imprints. And what makes it interesting is that usually that's like a side that's a little bigger, kind of like how you see right here. There's like a side is a little bigger and one side is a little smaller. Sometimes on longer ones, you can see kind of like that. And what this is cuneiform. You're actually seeing that in the Native America, because I already knew about this, but I didn't think nothing of it at the time, that the language of Akkadian had reached to the Americas, which I thought was really interesting when I first noticed that. But I didn't think anything of it. But I'm going to show you a genetic result that I wish I found yesterday, and I searched a little more and I found it. It's pretty is groundbreaking. It's pretty groundbreaking. But let me go to here. This is just that report I was talking about, how they found ancient humans more older than normal humans and everything inside pretty much let me open this in America. Make sure this is the one. Yep. Now, I'm not going to talk about the humans, but I want to talk about there's another find on here, which actually talks about that cuneiform, which let me actually go to that real fast and talk about that. So right here, now, what's interesting about cuneiform, the reason why this is interesting because I was talking about his sources, and it's what's important to know is that I put a note here because cuneiform it was recently deciphered. Um, so I just want to put a conclusion that I had found out. Amen. As I expected, after studying the archaeology of the land writing that was writing from of cuneiform, pretty much. That's what I'm pretty much explaining. Like this writing here you can see right there is a mix of paleo, and you can see it's kind of got that right here, kind of like the Egyptian style, because it's also important to know. I don't know why I didn't open this up. I'm gonna show a little example right here. Not this one. This one, I need a little more detailed one. Not this one. Let me just put a letter. Go down, and I should have it right here. All right, so let me show you something real fast. So it's important to notice the Semitic script, right? Is going to have a combination of the Egyptian, the Canaanites, and obviously the Hebrew, right? It's also important to know the reason why it's like that because they was all communicating with each other, so they had to find ways of communicating. Now the Akkadian language is different. The Akkadian language is a whole another level of different. When I say different, I mean as in a whole different people, different. And it's very interesting when seeing that. So this right here actually talks about the Akkadian, and this actually came in about the 1900s, but it came in about the 80s. Now, what's important about it is that you got to be careful when looking at some of these images. Like some of them look like menorahs, but if you count them, they're not menorahs because they're off. They're gonna be off. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's another one here that's 9 of them. There's 9 of them. So it's really interesting when seeing that. Um, these little designs is very similar. You can see these are Akkadian, different designs. You kind of see that. I'm gonna go back to this one, and you can see these designs right here, these little ones, and then it's gonna be mixed with that paleo. Right now, what's important to know, the pictographic Hebrew, this is pictographic Hebrew, is the oldest Hebrew. So it would have looked more pictographic, but it has more your Egyptian style writings there. So you can see some of the different style with the Egyptians. Because if you look at the Egyptians writing, they would have a lot of these birds with the effects of what they do. But you can tell with the ox head right there, that's definitely Shemitic. So you can tell with the ox head, and then you can tell with the bird and stuff. And then you got cuneiform there. You got some cuneiform mixed in here, which is interesting because when you look at the genetics, it makes sense. I'm just gonna let it play real fast, and I want to talk about a part here. So obviously, this is the Phoenicians. Now this right here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this is important to know that that's also what the cuneiform does, right? Because it has different levels of how much they have. Also, this is where I'm gonna talk about something real fast with that. I'm gonna be on one of the brothers' page to talk about something later on. So you can see you're gonna have different. Go back a little bit. You can see sometimes you'll have different shapes like this and shapes like this. It's just a style that they do. And what I'm gonna show you real fast is that I'm gonna let this play and I'm gonna show you something on another style of this. So it would look like that would be it. It would look like that. But then if you look carefully, you'll see different designs constantly like that. See here, remember how I showed you one that was 5 and another one that was a different number, and then another one that was 7, and then this one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's not consistent because it's using cuneiform. It's using a different form. It's using a different form here. And you can see right there, that's clearly without, and the reason why this is important is because you got to be careful when looking at some of these sources because this is why I put a note here. I'm going to show you something. Actually, I'll just jump right to the conclusion because that's something that I want to talk about with what I found. That was very interesting with some of the genetics. It actually opened the door to something that I was able to understand. But let me show you something real fast. It says it's interesting to notice their language is a mix of Akkadian cuneiform and what looks like ancient pictographic Hebrew, as Egyptians and Canaanites also spoke. As cuneiform was only deciphered recently, right? This is actually very important. It was only deciphered exactly in 1857. So a lot of sources, when they talk about these things, they look like they're Shemitic, they look like they're Hebrew. A lot of it wasn't decoded. They didn't know a lot of what this was. It was actually cuneiform. It was actually a form of writing that was just recently decoded. And what's important about this writing is that this was one of the writing of the people of the North. This was more not your Shemitic writing. This was more of a writing of the people of the North that would go from an area. Now, what made that also interesting, I found something really interesting that I didn't think I would find. So I found a very interesting connection in genetics that I was surprised to see. And I'm going to show that. So I just put it on this note. This note will be basically on the video when we talked about the who was in America and stuff. I just thought it was very interesting to find out, when we think about what's going on, what went on in the world, it's crazy because when you think about it, a lot of people, they actually had, because remember we was talking about RM 17 or 173 right there. That's basically what they mostly had. One is 73%, but there's 23% that has M269. And remember, M269 was the one we were trying to find. If they had M269, why? Because that's the one that most Europeans have, and that would mean that the people in America were actually the same as the people that colonized it, but different skin color. And that just shows the ignorance of the world. If you really think about that, just think about that for a second. That just shows the ignorance of the world based upon pigmentation. That's why I like studying this, because it gets deeper and it tells you how chaotic people were with sight. How chaotic people were with sight, but yet the life is in the blood. And we can see right here that when we look at the Native American ones who have that genetics, they also have RM, right? They had that one too, RM269. So that's why we was looking at that, because I was like, M173 is super close, but I couldn't find a pinpoint because we couldn't also dig up the genetics of the people of the land. But we all this was a rare find. When I seen this, I was like, this is like a pinpoint study that I seen, and the way that it's labeled, it just says is Native American or Y chromosome of African origin. I don't know why it was like that, why it had a label like that and everything. And then it gets to this paper and it talks about this paper right here, brings out this paper, which is really interesting because when I saw it, I was like, you know, I probably wouldn't have had found that. I probably would not have found that because the way that's titled, that doesn't make any sense. Think about that. Is Native American R Y chromosome of African origin? What in the world? Now, if anyone knows genetics, even if you don't, the R, you can look it up yourself. The reason why this is so interesting because that's just doesn't make any sense. But these are geneticists talking about such a idea. Now, the reason why they're calling it African, because I'm going to show you that it's also connected to a certain people. You probably are familiar with, or if you haven't heard of them, they're like the Chadic. All right, shalom, fam. I apologize for that. Um, just making sure turn this on real fast. Okay, so no, cuneiform is not Semitic. Cuneiform is not Semitic. I'm gonna go back over here. Let me open up what I was gonna show you real fast because I thought it was really interesting when we were studying on these things, and then we realized these things. We was looking at these things and seeing these things, and then the connections is so much connection. But let me show you the Chadic. What's interesting about the Chadic people is that they got B88. They have the R lineage. They have RV88, R1B V88. That's what's really interesting about that. I'm gonna show you why that's interesting because that's a branch from the branch. That's very interesting itself too. But let me show you something. Let me just because I like to get a full picture of been going on, what's really been going on in this world, what's really been happening. What's really been happening here. It really shows you that the world really has been going crazy, when you think about these things. So, bringing this truth out really is humbling, I think. So as we see right here, M173, right? We're trying to find if it was going to make M269. That's one of the things we wanted to see. This one doesn't go all the way to V88. I'm going to have to go to another note. In fact, I'm going to see if it's on one of these other notes. Otherwise, I have to type it down and grab one from there. I think it's from, think it is going to be on maybe, let's see if it's this one. Sometimes I just put a little important pieces in places. Let me see if I can find that real fast, because I was doing some very complex studying on what one of the geneticists were saying. Here's this is good. This one is good. This one's works. This one's fine. All right, so V88. You see V88 right there. Now, what's interesting about that is that you'll have this P25, which comes from here, which is from, remember, M173. M173 is the one we was talking about the other day. And then we was talking about, from M173, you're going to have this lineage here, and then you're going to have your V. They are going to be basically cousins, related, basically related, coming from a branch from M173. The Chadic. Now, the reason why I'm talking about the Chadic is because the way they look, the way the Chadic people look, they're from Africa. They'll say Africa, but they have the R lineage. Like, if I type this down, um, let's see. Usually, you type down what haplogroup is European, they'll just say, I or R, stuff like that. Now, the reason why I say that is because I'll open it up in a direct note with the direct information on these things. Let me just make sure I got enough time. All right. I'm just going to take no longer than, another little bit. Only got like a little hour to be done. Well, 30 minutes. But let me show you something real fast, because I want to show you this, because I think this connection is what's the word I'm looking for? This connection is, I don't know how to name this, but it's something. It's definitely something. It really makes you consider, what's been going on in this world, what's been really going on. So remember, we was trying to find if it was R1M269, and we remember that was, as always, beloved family, know that this is actually this. What we living in? We're in that time where it says, if I was to say thus, I would offend the people of the children of your people. Now, the reason why is like that because we're born in Babylon. We're born in Babylon, but we're saved by grace through faith. So it's very important to know that a lot of people in flesh do not boast in flesh at all. But understand this, that the world that we see right now, the connection in the blood, just understand this what it is. It is what it is. Just understand this. It's truth. Just truth is truth. So the sea people behind the Philistines were Aegean, from the land of Greece, pretty much going from the lands of Crete and stuff. And it says, including this lineage, R1B M269. Now, you see how it says including, because, it's a couple different lineages in who they call the sea peoples. Now, what's interesting about this is that, let me actually click this and go over with this. As remember, this is always for the sake of truth. Always for the sake of truth. Let me just go to something here. All right. So when examining the R lineage, this is what I have found. Let me just go over to one directly about it. Let me just see if it's right here. All right. So here's a direct understanding of it. So remember, this is why I was trying to find this one, RM269. More than 100 million European men carry a type called RM269. It's like your most common one when you think of the land of Europe. Here's an idea, like, think of Britain and stuff like that. These areas, that's your common one over here. Now, the reason why I want to find that one is because that one in particular would be fairly interesting to see, because that would be connected to sea peoples. So that would be very interesting. And so you see right here, it will tell us, so identifying when this genetic group spread out is a vital to understanding the peopling of Europe. So they want to know how it moved around. RM269 is most common in Western Europe, reaching frequencies of 90% or more in Spain, Ireland, and Wales, right? So just, it's your classic European one, but you can see a lineage like this that obviously is on a different kind of like cousins, but is a little darker, but even more closer. When I say closer, like basically close, when I say close, like their family, they can be from the same near fathers, it's that close. They're all from Japheth in the sense of understanding. But let me show you something. This was a really interesting find because it says, is Native American R Y chromosome of African origin? I wouldn't never had typed something down like that. I forgot how I even found it, but I was trying to find if they had this lineage in them, and that's what I seen. I was like, this is a rare report. This is a detailed rare report. And then look right here. Remember I told you about V88 or R1B1C? It says right here, it says the pristine form of R1M173, which is, remember, the one we was looking for, is found only in Africa. Okay. And it says in 2010, the name for the African R1M173, right, paragroup, in a sense, because, it's going to be a subclad from R, right? And it's actually going to be right here, R-P25. Now, it just says it was changed into haplogroup. They say, just change it to V88 or R1B1C. See what's going on there? And then it just talks about the frequency of Y chromosome R1 M173 in Africa range between 7 to 95% and average from 39 to 0.5%, which is very interesting when seeing those things. Our M173 chromosome is found frequently in Africa, but rare to, obviously, it's actually going to be in a certain part of Africa. That's also important to know right here. Long story short, that's where they are pretty much. They're like in the center of it, which is really interesting. It looks like they could have had connections with Egypt. Like maybe they started in Egypt and they moved down. So maybe they was like a people that came and invaded here and they were darker skinned, because actually a lot of these sea peoples, they were darker skinned. A lot of sea peoples, when you look at genetics and some of the things that's in them that makes their pigmentation, they were darker skinned. Even J, the J haplogroup, we know word for word is darker skin. And it actually tells us they was like the color of the, as you say, quote unquote, African American. That's actually what's found in them. So these group must have came down and most likely been in Egypt, and they came down here, which is also interesting because I heard, when they talk about Tutmosis, they say that they found our lineage in him. So he can definitely be of the Chadic people. I wonder, is it actually maybe it's the same branch? I wonder to see if it's actually that same direct V88 or something close to that. Very interesting to see that. So you can see coming to that branch. So related families, you can see that all under M173. That's very, very close. That's very, very close. It's very, very interesting to see. Very, very close. Because remember, there's also other haplogroups. These are R's. There's different groups that are more further apart than if someone was an R and then someone else was an R. They're more closer than someone who would be like an I or like a whole another haplogroup. So it's very interesting to see them that close from a branch like that. Very, very, very interesting. So going back to this, the reason why I think it's interesting because also the language. Now, the reason why I say with the language, because this language, if you follow the history of it, it has some very interesting history. Maybe they got a nice little quote here. Otherwise, I'll just tell you something real fast about it. You can see right here, it was a language that was obviously picked up right here in Akkadian, the language of Babylon, right in Babylon and Assyria, pretty much. It was known across the ancient Near East, with versions also found and whatnot, and pretty much the Hittites with the Hittites. Now it's also important to know the Hittite nation was invaded. Hittite nation became pretty much a North nation that was owned by the North. Very important to see the history behind the Hittites. Very important to see that. So now, though it reached to the Levant because of the Babylonian Assyrians and stuff like that, it was not originally of the Levants. It was actually more of a language that people didn't know. They in fact, it was a language that not a lot of people knew, and they just recently decoded it. Just recently, like the 1800s. So a lot of the quotes about some of the writings containing these writings from the Sumerians and Akkadians, it's important to know that a lot of their writings were actually going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Not knowing what's on these things. They wasn't knowing what was on these things. But maybe I'll let you hear a little bit of what's said on this thing. It's really interesting to see that.
The existence of the jug known as the Fuente Magna is such a thorny subject that some historians are still trying to find a way to prove that it's a fake, more than half a century after it was discovered in Pumapunque, Bolivia in 1950. It's not so much the jug that's significant, but the script that decorates the sides of it. To many people, including noted expert Dr. Clyde Winters, the writing is a form of cuneiform and can be directly compared to early forms of both Sumerian and Semitic cuneiform. He's been able to point to especially apparent similarities between the Sumerian cuneiform and the cuneiform on the Fuente Magna, and that presents a substantial historical problem. The ancient Sumerians came from the part of the world that we now call the Middle East, mostly from Iraq. There ought to be no way whatsoever that their language could have spread as far as Peru. If they did, it means that the Sumerians were an incredibly advanced seafaring race, and that they too ought to be considered among the first foreign people to arrive in the Americas.
Now, didn't we just read a quote that said the Canaanites somehow got to the islands, and we seen some writing that said that they were in the lands of Brazil? And remember, there was no borders here. So all the people, there was no borders as the colonization that had happened. So if someone's here, someone will be here, they'll be all over the place. But you can see there's evidence of people reaching from here. Now, it's also interesting to take note that the people from here, their genetics, a lot of people, when we think about the Scythians, that's important to know too. I forgot to mention that. Let me make sure I mention that. The Scythians have that Y chromosome. That's another reason why I wanted to note that, because those are like some of they are known throughout all history by almost every historian that made a map. That's how important the Scythians were. They were not talked a lot about nowadays, but in ancient times, they destroyed Assyria. They took down Cyrus and Darius. Took down Cyrus and Darius. Women defeated them. It was crazy. But you can see right here 6 male Scythian samples from the leaders, and they show that it's R1B M269. So that's why I wanted to find that, because it's interesting to see that, right? You've probably seen this name before. It's getting a lot of attention in history, because of the genetics and everything. So it's getting a lot of attention in history with these things. So I think it's very interesting. I thought that was very interesting. So I just want to show you that I didn't have this yesterday, but I wanted to show you this full connection today. I'm glad I had enough time to show all these things, because look at what Flavius Josephus says. In fact, I don't have it right here. Let me go right over here. Now, the reason why I say that, because I just want you to understand that when I say that they're really what's the word I'm looking for? They're actually from Japheth. The reason why I'm showing this, because I'm showing you genetics actually prove the Bible. I'm showing you this, that genetics prove the Bible, and I'm going to show you with a historical quote that the Scythians and all those lineages and all that you've seen there, that's what it is. That's just what it is. And the full picture is more. So that's the Scythians right there. Now in the Bible, they're actually mentioned in the Bible. They're mentioned by name as a group and in detail. Unfortunately, in truth, for the sake of understanding, they're actually mentioned as, you can look up the definition of them, right? Scythians, whatnot, just says considered the wildest of barbarians. But let me show you something real fast, considering them and whatnot. Let me just go down and show you something here, because I think it's really interesting when you consider historical quotes. So here's one from Flavius Josephus. I'll go to one that's a little more clear. I think this one down here, if I have one right here. All right, so look what it says here. This is what it says. It says, this is Flavio Josephus, a first century historian recording what the people knew. And this is what also the people knew, because he also says he's saying this in their language, in their name, in the names that they know. Because he also was writing in the Greek and Latin, stuff like that. Because it was translated. Remember, it's translated in Slavic. His words are translated in Slavic earlier, Latin earlier, Greece, and all that whatnot. So let's see what's said here. For Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians, which are the Gauls, but were then called Gomerites, right? This is where it gets interesting about Magog, right? Gog and Magog, you probably heard that before. Magog founded those that from him were called the Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called the Scythians. You see how that works? Because the Scythians, when I've been studying on the Scythians, I said that these people in the time of the biblical narrative were conquering the north. They were destroying. They owned the north. They were combining with the Sumerians. They had them pretty much alliancing with them, and then they was pretty much just conquering the north. Like they took down Assyria, they invaded Persia. Is all types of things that was going on with them. They weren't a weak people. They was extremely powerful people. So I was like, why you don't see a lot of talk about the Scythians? Come to find out, they come back. This is a type of history that comes back. What's that word I'm looking for? It comes back to hunt you in a way. It comes back and says, we're not going yet. Even the scripture, and the reason why I say this is because this is scripture. Scriptures come into life. That's why when we accept Christ, you're leaving the flesh. Because if you stay in the flesh, almost everyone is actually going to be Magogites. And that's actually important to know when going to the root and looking at that, right? That's actually going to be our lineage. That's going to be your Hittites, your Armenians and stuff like that. I'm going to go more into topics, your Germanic and stuff like that, Celtics and whatnot, just to get a little more understanding on the connections, right? Scythians, things like that. And now Native Americans. So it's very interesting to see that. Now, the reason why I say that is because that was a mystery. We can't dig up the ancient people in America. So is this from colonization though? That's the question. Is this just from colonization? I don't think so. I don't think that's from colonization. The number, especially the certain tribe that we looked at. Remember, we looked at the Somalis, the ones that fled away, the ones that were pretty much they were ones that didn't give up for a long time. You can look up the history on them. They pretty much didn't give up for a long time. But that's really interesting. Your RM173 obviously having a higher percentage, 73%, and then finding that rare in them that RM269. So very interesting to see, and a high percentage, that 21%. Very interesting to see those things. So I just thought that was very interesting to take note of. And then just to see how they say they're connected to Africans. Like I was thinking, like, why would you connect such a thing like that? Why would you say that would be African? But then I remembered about the Chadic people. But that's the type of thing that when you see people of skin color, you don't know what's really in them. You don't know what's really in someone with skin color. That's why I was talking about with the ones in Sidon and those lands. They had darker pigmentation, but you didn't know who they were. Kind of like it's like they say Chatterman. It's like Chatterman, right? Chatterman, his DNA is actually going to be I. There's a female of Chatterman, when they say Chatterman, someone in the time of Chatterman, someone who was related, that had a U. They had a U, which is actually your European lineage. They had a U. So they had a I. This one had an I, and then that's why one of the persons that were connecting, they were saying J is actually European because they know J and I began together, and that's why they knew Chatterman was European because he was far up. They knew he was European. So it's really interesting to see, when you look at them and see the pigmentation, because a lot of times, people are stuck in the idea of ethnicity, right? Modern terms of who people are, right? When they say African American or these things or that, and they don't really think of the complexity of the life in the blood. Life in the blood actually shows the complexity. But if we just understand the understanding of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, it's clear, super clear. Amen. So also understand, remember in the Shamolis in that area, remember there was also E1B1A that went down there. So that's why you got to also be careful on some of those reports. Some of those reports, if they're before, just remember if they're before 1857 and they talk about some of the writings, if they look like they're, like I said right there, if they look like they're Hebrew, be careful. They might not be Hebrew. They might be cuneiform. That's cuneiform. You can tell because look at the layering. Well, obviously, for the sake of understanding, cuneiform is actually going to be something where you tap it down and it makes a layer. So you can see this one's layered over it. You can see this one down, and then it crosses over because this one's being stumped down over it. So it's just really interesting to see that, because I think that's the type of things you got to be careful, because there's some great sources here to actually show that obviously the Somalis and stuff like that, they had Israelites come down into that area. So a lot of Indians were called Israelites because traditions and stuff like that. You also got to remember Canaanites could possibly also leave the things that they were doing at first. They can also leave the things that they were doing, right? Culture doesn't make blood. Culture doesn't make blood. Anyone can change. Anyone can change if they're willing. They don't change and they're caught as they are, they'll be caught naked. And that would not be good. So I thought that was interesting. All these things, I thought that was interesting. So I guess in summary, I guess to put it short, after finding all these things, the Indians were darker skinned, but they were actually European. So I guess long story short, I'm gonna have a live on one of the brothers' page. I have the link in the description. Will, son of Yah. I'm gonna have a conversation with him on a very interesting topic. Probably already heard of it. We talked a little bit about the Natufian. We're gonna talk a little bit more on it. So with that, family, very, very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. I think it's something to definitely keep in mind. So connecting languages and genetics, yeah, I think definitely the people from overseas came to America. So America was actually empty and was filled with people from overseas. So very interesting to see that. So with that, family, I'm gonna go live in about 10 minutes, and then we're gonna shut it down with truth. So with that, get some more prophecy. We're gonna start talking more prophecy, because the last thing I'm gonna bring out is this Gog and Magog note. That's gonna be probably the last synthetic Sunday. But this note has been complex. But you see what the fruit is bringing. It shows us that don't judge by sight. Don't judge by sight, and always be humble and always be ready, because time is at hand. So just know that a lot of people are going to be surprised that they've been searching for Gog and Magog, and it might have been more close than they thought. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved, and amen.